Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. After the usual cheerful brutality of the photographer, we can set proceedings going. Before I hand over to the chair of the Council of DIAS, Vincent Kinane, I'll just say a few words myself. I'm Sean Rainbird, an interloper, but you're the host of Where You're Sitting. I'm the gallery director, and it's probably better if I turn the microphone up. Welcome to the gallery. You've made it to a place of dryness on one of the most revolting evenings I've experienced in Dublin, which is, as we all know, those of us that live here and work here, is quite a wet city. And the gallery has been spending the last couple of years digging rather deep holes to essentially bring a 19th century building into the 21st century with technologies that will handle the air in the right kinds of ways to create a constant 20 degrees of temperature and 50 degrees of relative humidity, which is the norm across international museums these days. We have a well-built building, but in fact, literally through that wall there, we have been spending 30 million of our own funds and public funds to undertake this work over the last 2 years, and at some point in the middle of next year we'll get the building back, and then we've got another 6 months before we actually have to re-hang our entire collection, move the entire collection as well as refresh the parts we're in at the moment. And so there's going to be a great deal of work still ahead of us, and I hope very much that all of you who are Dublin-based will bear with us a little while longer while we undertake that work. I'm very pleased to see in the audience also Luke Drury, who as president of the Royal Irish Academy was on our board for the period, I think it was 3 years, wasn't it, Luke? The Royal Irish Academy is one of the nominating bodies that sends its president to sit for 3 years on the board of the National Gallery, and we've always benefited enormously from that contribution, as well as the other institutions that nominate people to the board of the National Gallery. We're over 150 years old now, and looking at the title of the talk tonight, Celts in the Cosmos, we've finally reached the heavens with the talk tonight, and I'm very fascinated at the thought of what we're going to hear. We had reached the depths of hell last Saturday with the reading of Dante's Inferno, from beginning to end, 34 cantos of it, by 34 different speakers, but kicked off by the president, Michael D. Higgins, in Irish, followed by the Italian ambassador in Italian, and various languages followed, including Spanish and Catalan and German and more Italian and English, as we went through the day. But you probably won't make it to Purgatory in Cork tomorrow, but if you're around still next Friday, you'll have Paradise in Trinity College. But it's, of course, really, in essence, we look up, we look down, we look left, we look right, and one of the aspects of the National Gallery that I particularly cherish is the fact that we don't see ourselves as a gallery for pictures, paintings. We're a platform for all kinds of things to take place, whether with people sitting in our hall or walking through the galleries, of course, online as well. But we're really about the community in this city, and it's very great to see your event taking place within our walls. So without further ado, I'll hand over to your chair and hope you have a very spirited and stimulating evening. Thank you very much.
Sean, thanks very much for those words of welcome, and we're absolutely delighted to be here. It's certainly the most interesting entrance to a lecture theatre I've ever come across, when you have to walk past Caravaggios, Picassos, Dubuquets, etc. So it's a wonderful entrance, and we're delighted to be here tonight. And what is a very special occasion for the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. 75 years in the making. And we've had a very special day today. We were out in Oris Nuctaron with President Higgins. Again, he did speak to us in Irish and English, but didn't mention hell once. So it was very special. It was very special for the Institute, very special for everybody that works there and is associated with it. And we had, as well as our staff, we had members of our boards, the three boards, and senior professors, etc. It was a very special day with a very special speech given by our president. And we would have expected his knowledge of culture and Celtic studies, but he also displayed great depth of understanding and knowledge of scientific research and what that means to him and what it has meant for this country. So we've had a very special day. We're delighted to be celebrating the 75 years. Those years have gone from the very good to, I suppose, in some senses, the depth where our future was uncertain. And hopefully, at this juncture, we are reaching for a very secure future in a country that will again value and reward fundamental research. Because fundamental research, basic research, has been the cornerstone of this institute for its 75 years. That has not always been matched by the commitment of the government to fundamental research, but it has always been matched, the ambition to do fundamental research to the very highest level. The international class and world class research has been the cornerstone of DIAS since its foundation, and it has achieved many, many great things over the years. But tonight is the culmination of really our 75 years. It's about a special lecture delivered by a very special lecturer on this very special occasion. Werner Nahm joined DIAS in 2002 as a senior professor and director of the School of Theoretical Physics. He came to us from the University of Bonn, but he previously worked at CERN for several years and as a professor at the University of California at Davis. He is a world leader in quantum field and in string theory and has received many prestigious awards, the most recent of which includes the Fellowship of the Royal Society in the UK. He was awarded the Max Planck Medal for Theoretical Physics, and this is the highest award from the German Physical Society, which was for his fundamental work on quantum field theory. In particular, he was able to clarify several basic mathematical aspects that later became important for the development of string theory. His most recent award has been that of the 2005 Royal Irish Academy Gold Medal. But the Max Planck Medal he shares with other recipients, including Einstein, Heisenberg, Fermi, Dirac, and of course, one of the names most closely associated with the Institute, Ernst Schrödinger. So, Werner comes to us in a line of theoretical physics that stretches from Schrödinger and he is undoubtedly a world-class scientist. Before he won those recent awards, he had also recipient of the Lisa Meitner Prize for his important and pioneering work on supersymmetry and magnetic monopoles. He's also received, of course, the ultimate accolade any mathematician can have, the Nahm equations. So many named equations after him. So his legacy will live long after he does, and we hope he lives for a very long time. Among Werner's unique gifts are his fluency in languages, including Mandarin Chinese. He has exploited his vast knowledge and understanding to achieve progress in a wide range of subjects, including ancient Mayan history and writing. Recently, he published work that has solved a 100-year-old problem about calculating the dates for the great Mesopotamian rulers in the 2nd millennium BC. He's a true polymath and is interested in cross-disciplinary work. He has been working not just in the School of Theoretical Physics in DIAS, but also reaching out and working with his colleagues in the School of Celtic Studies. And their work on the 3D imaging of Olm stones has been fantastic and has opened up a whole area of research for researchers around the globe who are able to access these 3D images on the internet. I can think of no one more suited to talk to us tonight about Celts in the cosmos than somebody who spans theoretical physics and Celtic studies. We're delighted on this very special occasion for Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies to welcome Professor Werner Nahm to talk tonight. Thank you, Werner.
Well, many thanks to the National Gallery for your hospitality, and thanks for your kind and, of course, exaggerated words. but doesn't matter. Of course, nobody is really qualified to talk about the three subjects in one institute, which were put together in a slightly random way for political, private, whatever reasons. But certainly I'll try to do, and Luke at least said there's a nice alliteration with Celts and the cosmos. So I will, but I won't talk much about the heavens. In fact, cosmic physics consists of two parts. One is astrophysics and one is geophysics. And now we had nice talks by Tom Rafferty on 100 years of gravity and last week on gravitational waves. And so I hope that has been covered sufficiently. So I will stay closer to the geophysics side. And in any case, in order to bring these rather disparate things together, I will stay with the fringe activities of several people, of us, Schrödinger, for example, as you know well. And, well, I can mention hell in passing. But and in fact, of course, when you read Dante, you see that hell is a much more interesting place than paradise. Okay, we'll see. So I can start with Tom Ray. He will not be embarrassed because he's not here, because he's in Chile, showing the European Southern Observatory to the Irish ambassador. You know, that's always Luke and I, we have slightly different interests, so we understand each other. For me, the highest priority would be Ireland joining CERN. For him, Ireland joining the European Southern Observatory would be more important. Now, CERN is cheaper, so probably. Well, anyhow, so Tom, you might know from you can see him on the web for the work he has done about Newgrange. So I don't show Newgrange from the outside because the archaeological reconstruction is wrong, but that's what you see in the winter solstice in the interior. It's quite nice. So just on that day, light is penetrating rather far. So that's from a publication of Tom Ray, who really is an astrophysicist, of course. But he has this paper in Nature in 1989 about the dating of Newgrange. Because he said, well, that looks quite impressive, but not really impressive enough. It's the best you can see today, 4.5 minutes after sunrise. The sun shines down there, 18 meters. However, when the thing was constructed, it looked much more impressive. And you can use that to date the construction of Newgrange. So a very good idea. And so he did the calculation. And what comes out is that. So that's the floor plan of Newgrange by O'Kelly. And O'Kelly agreed when Tom was publishing that in Nature that he could put in his own line, the red line here, where light would have shone 5,150 years ago. And there was a narrow beam of light which reached right the middle of the back at the end of the Holy Passage. So, well, if that's not interdisciplinary work, I don't know what should qualify for it. It definitely brings together the cosmos and the people who built this tomb. And that's all very nice, except, well, they were not cats. Sorry for that. But I mean, pre-Celts and the cosmos really would not have something well. And I will talk about cats. So, well, still one can ask a lot of questions now. So, what were the builders? Which language did they speak? Why did they build such a tool? And then, since they were interested in the sun, what were their words for star and sun? And, well, when did the language become Gaelic? So, do we descend from the builders of Newgrange or from new immigrants? It's, of course, crazy questions, but then the word polymath has been mentioned, so I mentioned another polymath who was a bit crazy, like all polymath. But, he was knighted nevertheless. So what song the siren sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself amongst women, though puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture. So that's, of course, the only thing I will do to make a few conjectures with some evidence. And so you will see if that's crazy or not. So the chairman of our board complained that when he came yesterday, his taxi driver did not know about DIAS. But he should have said, well, have you heard about the place where they proved that there were two St. Patricks but no God? That's a line which is well known in Dublin, even among many people who do not know that they refer to DIAS. So, due to Miles Gobelin, who had to pay a fine of £50 for them, but a colleague of his said, I gladly would have paid £50 if I had found that one-liner. So the guy with the two St. Patricks is him. Unfortunately, I did not find a better photograph. Maybe School of Celtic Studies has a better one, but I just had no time to inquire. So we all can be very thankful for him, because his book about early Irish history and mythology really is a bestseller. You can still get it for 40 euros, I think, from us. And it was reprinted, published 46, reprinted 3 times, still is in demand. Wikipedia still has a page on his theory of the history of Ireland, though they say it's all wrong. And this is a bit small, and I can read it, but I'm not sure that I myself understand it. That's not a citation by him, but a simplified and shortened version by some German guy, Heinemeyer, who reviewed his work. The Grythim Britanni were exclusively Celtic, Indo-European and Razan language. These Grythim, who belonged to the P-Celtic branch, must be considered as identical with the first Celts that ever set foot on Irish soil. The Gaelic invasion occurred within the years 150 to 50 BC. Well, 2 things. Firstly, the letter P will come up several times during that talk, so you might pay attention to that. And also, this thing really should have been a scandal, because that guy essentially claimed that Ireland was Welsh for several centuries. Now, if you're a regular listener to the RTE, you might have noticed that this was a big political issue in this year with the excessive interest of DIAS in Welsh. I wondered why Miles Gobelin and Brian Nolan did not write something about this kind of scandal, that De Valera appoints a senior professor at DIAS who says that the land belongs to the Welsh or whatever. Of course, in 46, by court order, Brian Nolan was no longer allowed to speak about DIAS. But in fact, this guy Heinemeyer I checked out. This was not the first time O'Reilly published that theory. He had done it 10 years before, so he clearly had this view when he was made senior professor. Well, is that theory true? or not. So I don't know, we all don't know, but I think soon we will know. And that's due to the second guy. You see, that's the guy with the two St. Patricks, who has a book on it. And that's the guy about the new God, which is that well-known booklet, last chapter. And I imagine some talk over a cup of tea at DIAS, where O'Reilly says, well, there were 4 immigrations into Ireland by Celts, and the first 3 were P-Celtic, and only the last one brought the Gaelic language. And Schrödinger said, can you prove it? And, should see some facts in the ground or so. Can't an archaeologist look for that and find all your invasions abroad? Probably O'Reilly would have said, well, yes, you see it, but archaeology is a broken mirror, and anyhow, pots don't speak. And so Schrödinger would have said, well, but when you say that people migrated, people came, so you can find the remains, the physical remains of the people. And O'Reilly would say, bones don't speak either. And then Schrödinger said, well, but I mean, these people brought their inheritance, so can't you look for that? Well, what do you mean inheritance? Well, genes, but genes is an abstract thing. Well, but as a physicist, I don't believe in such things just in the abstract thing. There must be a material basis. So shouldn't one talk to the archaeologists if they would find that? Well, even if genes would exist, wouldn't they be long lost after a few centuries? And then Schrödinger would do a quantum mechanical calculation and say, well, there is a chance that they might be still around. Well, of course, it's purely fictitious. But it's something which might have happened in a way, and sort of these kind of flights of fancy, which over decades and sometimes with a very long lead time lead to big progress in knowledge. And well, I said that Schrödinger would have done a calculation where he would have claimed that the whole thing was pretty stable at that time, and when he published that booklet and gave his talks, he was convinced that genes were proteins. And proteins can be pretty stable. Of course, now we know that genes are in DNA, which is somewhat less stable, and I will talk about that a bit. So the chances were not so good if he would have really known about the physical basis of inheritance. But still, the basic idea, of course, is true. When you claim that the migration took place, just look at the remains of people at both ends of the migration and show that they were parents and children. So this is what happens when you look not on the ancient DNA, which I will come to at a later time, but if you look at the present table, present picture of genes in Britain, and you see, thanks to Watergate, the result of a big migration. That's the Anglo-Saxons. Actually, when you look at it more closely, then they say it's about half of the inheritance is Anglo-Saxon migrants, and half is local people. So the simplest theory would be Anglo-Saxon men taking all the local women. However, that cannot be quite true because when the archaeologists look at Saxonia at that period, really whole villages, many villages were deserted. All these people had heard about the nice country and the great riches you could get in Britain. And so they came over, and well, quite a few among them must have been women. But of course, the first one were warriors. And well, where are the Celts? One of the immediate comments were that there are no Celts. when you move outside of this Anglo-Saxon region, you see quite a variety of genes. Well, the easiest thing is here, the Orkney Islands. That's the Vikings. And one of the remarkable things is you see no Vikings elsewhere. So they certainly had their own invasion, but it was such a small scale that this was lost to history. Like in Hungary. So the Hungarians made a rather violent invasion around 900, but you see no traces of it in the genes of today Hungarians. And also, 1066, you see no traces of it. So the Normans who came were not so numerous to change the genetic makeup. But here the Anglo-Saxons in the 5th century and 6th century or so, they made a really big difference. So this whole area. But look there is a big difference between Powys and Diffords of northern and southern Wales. Very different. And Cornwall is still different. There is somewhat less of a difference. I didn't show the quantitative difference between. So Devon and Cornwall are reasonably close, but you still have a genetic boundary agreeing with the parish boundaries. So there was not too much intermarriage across that border. Now, unfortunately, there were no data from the bigger part of Ireland, but at least in Northern Ireland you have data. You see here that really, from a genetic point of view, and actually also from a linguistic point of view, there is very little difference between Scottish and Irish over there. There are lots of puzzles. There are really two genetic types, and I don't know what's the meaning of that. The Picts are over here. We had one talk which claims that there really were two groups of Picts, might have spoken quite different languages. So one of them, the other Caucasian. So there are two different genetic groups there, but I think one should do a lot more of work to go to the details, and in particular one needs historical depth. One should not only look at modern DNA, but look at the DNA of 500 AD and 500 BC and whatever. But anyhow, I mean, that's Vortigern and his advisors. So the question is, what's over here? Do you see effects of the politics of Diarmaid O'Muircheartaigh? Or will it be like the Norman over there? They didn't have much of a genetic impact. I just don't know, and I can't even conjecture. But I certainly would like what the map looks like over here. So, the question is, of course, to what extent one should trust the paleogeneticists. This is a new science, and a few years ago there was a big fuss. You could get a free pint when you belong to the O'Briens, and my son here has the second name Muircheartaigh, which is O'Brien name, but I didn't get a free pint for that. That's from one page on the web, following a paper coming from Trinity College. Neil of the Nine Hostages led from the legends of Ireland straight into the modern world when scientists at TCD revealed that as many as 3 million men living today may carry his Y-DNA signature. Well, maybe or maybe not. I mean, certainly people found this Y DNA signature long before him, and if I am correctly informed, even among the hunter-gatherers. But still, there might be some truth in it. So I can't find out, but certainly, more work has been done on Genghis Khan, so where the same claim was made. And when you look at it, you get contradictory results. Looking at the genes from putative descendants, and looking at the most common haplotype of the Y chromosome and, among the Mongolians. So that is here the thing claimed for Genghis Khan. And then there was a paper claiming that there are 11 more lineages of leading nomad leaders. And then there were some other people who made the calculation to what extent you would get that just from pure statistics. And there certainly is something on the order of 5% probability that you even get an outlier like that just by accident. It's like with family names. So this is essentially what comes out as Zipf's law. I was tempted to write down at least one equation, but if you have been in a Common's talk, he dared to write down E is mc squared, but nothing else. So for a public talk, maybe one shouldn't do it. So the whole thing is perhaps not so certain. And anyhow, the haplotypes of the sex chromosomes are essential if you want to look into individuals, like Neil of the Nine Hostages or Genghis Khan. But when you look at populations, you should look at all of the genes, the complete genome, which gives you much more information than just the thing over here. So, and this larger perspective on populations, where at least as a first step, you should go, you should get the bigger picture. In fact, 75 years, but 75 years is maybe a good excuse to look at 7,500 years or something like that. Well, when you really go to the cosmos, of course, what Comet did in this talk, then you can forget about that. But still, I mean, what the paleogeneticists are claiming is that after the Ice Age, there were 3 genetic ages in Europe, interrupted by 2 big migrations. So more extensive than the red Anglo-Saxon one we saw on the picture before. That's first the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, and then came the migration of the first farmers. Then there were the bigger part of the Neolithic age, and then came a migration from the Pontic steppes. And then the third age, late Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, presence, just no difference. So no genetic change afterwards. So to some extent, it looks like when you read the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Iron Age, but not quite, because he got the boundaries slightly wrong. But when you read his description of the Golden Age, it's a hunter-gatherer society. There's more emphasis on the gatherers. The second, the Silver Age, this is about when you cannot just harvest the grains, but you have to sow them. So that's the farmers. And actually about migration, I should have mentioned, since I had Thomas Brown at the beginning, so he had lots of crazy theories, but he still influences our everyday language, including the scientific language. So he was the first one to use common words like approximate, computer, electricity, and migrant. So that we should be thankful to him that we are freer in the way we express ourselves. So the question is, was an ancestor of our language around already immediately after the Ice Age, a language which changed slowly, or did it come with that migration, or did it come with that migration? Basically no other possibilities. And traditionally, certainly if you would have asked a Germanic scholar at the time of O'Reilly, then the old theory happened at that time. Horse-loving pastoralists coming from the steppes. And then this theory fell out of fashion with the archaeologists. So Colin Renfrew claims it came with the first farmers. Well, and now the paleogeneticists say, well, the old opinion was correct, and Colin Renfrew was wrong. So one cannot always dismiss the old theories. So if you have O'Reilly's book, well, maybe there's some aspects in it which are true, even if they are out of fashion. You never know. But one certainly should be very careful and not be too quick to believe the paleogeneticists, even when they publish in Nature and in Science. Because when you go 2 years back, 2013, was the first paper by essentially the same people, where but they only were looking at the haplotypes, so they had less data. But in that paper, you find 3 migrations, and even with a supplementary material with nice movies where they show migration number 1, migration number 2, and migration number 3. So migration number 3 probably never happened. So the whole movie is rubbish. But not unexpectedly, they just regard 2013 as distant prehistory. You do not have to talk about. So they're just quiet about it, and there was never a mea culpa, an explanation why they did the error, which I find somewhat annoying. Well. So that was a lot of fine print. In fact, I have the fine print basically to relieve my conscience, because when you give a public talk, you make a lot of statements which are only approximately true, to use Thomas Brown's word, but still it's the best one can do. So, well. But when you are interested in that, where do the Celts come from? When did they come to Ireland? When you're a university professor, then it's very easy. You give a course on it, and at DIAS it's not so easy to teach. I mean, of course, we can make an arrangement with Trinity or so, but then it always turned out that the things I would like to teach about were taught by someone else. So the other, well, I don't have to read that. I mean, that's what people think about us, and of course they are right. So we have a lot of fun in doing whatever we do. And certainly in this case, the next best alternative to teaching a course about such questions, organizing a conference about it. So of course it would have been completely futile to approach SFI, but now I hear that a considerable amount of money will be given to the Irish Research Council, so maybe things will change. But at that time, fortunately, I could get money from an academy in Germany, so we had a nice conference on paleogenetics, linguistics, archaeology. And well, the archaeologists are somewhat envious to the amount of money which is thrown after paleogenetics. So, and the paleogeneticists, they don't have to work very hard. Of course, they work very hard in their own way. They get their data and they publish them, and they get a lot of credit for it. But then if some archaeologist comes and, well, I have looked at an area where you make claims and I see exactly the opposite, then, well, they don't particularly like to talk to each other. So you have to work quite hard to get them together at the conference. But it worked nicely. And one of the things I learned, when you look at all the migrations and in the history book, you have nice maps with lots of arrows. And the arrows basically have no basis in facts. So I worked I looked very hard at the map which had the smallest number to find the map with the smallest number of arrows. And that was the spread of agriculture, so the migration of the first farmers. And even this map has a big error, but fortunately you can't see it from the distance. So this thing here, the reason the map was made, this is here a grain of some early version of wheat, which was found in England. And then the archaeologists claimed that came by trade, when this region here was not yet farming. But then the paleogeneticists looked at that and said, we know how ancient DNA looks like, and Schrödinger could have calculated that. The whole thing gets degraded. And the wheat DNA, which was dug out very carefully, didn't show these signs of degeneration at all. And the archaeologists claim, well, maybe it was well protected, but it doesn't really make sense. If you have a certain temperature, then DNA will decay spontaneously. You will have changes, and so probably the whole thing is a contamination. So I took that little picture because, well, forget about the fork here, but there are two arrows, and so the farmers, well, and the people who are responsible for Newgrange, because that's Newgrange is from the Second Age, they came along two different routes, one along the Danube and one along the Mediterranean. Now, I must have thought about the Mediterranean quite a lot, with too much rain outside. So you will see a few pictures from the Mediterranean. But actually there is also one scientific reason. The whole thing is closer to written history. And as you have heard, I'm always interested in written documents where one gets more information than just from archaeology alone or from speculation. And so for the Mediterranean, there are just more data. But one nice thing about this little picture is the arrows stop, and they stop approximately at the place where the migration stalled. Initially, then the farmers took over vast territories, probably just by numerical superiority. But then eventually the migration stopped. There was lots of mixing with the locals, so genetic mixing. And then new cultures arose, obviously from what had been brought in by the migrants, and what was the experience of the locals. And then these cultures, for example, well, something like Newgrange, one of the typical things which came out of it was building communal tombs with big stones. And it really was an age where communal efforts were extremely important for all the communities. After the second invasion, you had a change from communal tombs to single tombs. So the whole psychology changed. So when you look at it, this arrow in the Mediterranean goes straight across Sardinia, and when you check with the geneticists, the Sardinian population, even today, is basically pure early farmers. So these people who came somewhat here from the Middle East, they came over here, probably not densely populated, so they settled in Sardinia, and these genes you still see today. So I will come back to the Celts, but I mean, I'll talk first about this part, this branch, because, well, you know more about the languages, or you can guess more about the languages which spread here. In fact, linguistically, probably this region was quite complex initially. But as you can see, more recently, the spread of agriculture in southern Africa. The original region is linguistically very complicated, but the longer you follow a migration to the south, the more homogeneous it becomes. And then southern Africa, apart from the hunter-gatherer languages, is essentially pure Bantu. And something similar can be seen here along the Mediterranean. So I don't show you any picture with arrows for the second migration. I say this was a migration by horse lovers. Now, how do you know? Well, that's some technique called linguistic paleontology. You look at the Sanskrit language, and you look at Germanic and Irish and so on, and then you have expressions like horse friend, which appear over huge distance in the region. And you also see a lot of wagon terminology, starting with wheel, of course. Wheel is a very old word, which you find over the whole region, and obviously brought in at the time of the second migration. So I don't want to go in great details. We talked about that a lot in Mainz. There were also talks about then how these languages which came in split up and developed to the branches of Indo-European, including Celtic. So the feeling was that maybe Celtic came up a bit more to the west than what you see in the old theories to the west of the Alps. Some of the exhibitions which you see, they claim that the very rich merchants in the Alps from the Hallstatt cult, they were Celtic. I rather believe that they were a little bit like Vortigern. So they were very rich, so they had many enemies, so they had to get some efficient soldiers, and the Celts, of course, were near enough to come and very ready to help, and in fact, then thought of, instead of just fighting very hard for these rich guys, why don't we take the riches ourselves? So, very logical thing to do. And well, but coming back to the Mediterranean, you had this long way from the east of the Mediterranean to the west, and in the west, linguistically, it's very uniform. So what traces there are in place names from Old Sardinian, and what you have in Basque and Iberian, on the Iberian Peninsula, looks very much alike. And so linguistically, you hope that maybe if you understand what happens at one end, so in Basque, for example, which there's now much more interest in Basque than a year ago, because that's supposed to be one of the languages of the first farmers which came in before the Indo-Europeans, before the Celts, and languages in the area they came from. And when you look at the area they came from, that's the Caucasus. So there are 3 language groups, or 2, depending on which linguist you talk to. The Northern Caucasus and the Southern Caucasus. So Southern Caucasus is probably better known, Georgian and so on. The north you have Chechen and Ingush and Abkhaz and whatever. And many languages I never heard about before, because there are about 50 languages in the Northern Caucasus. And now one of the participants in our conference was a Russian linguist, and he made he looked at the 50 most common words in a language, the most stable words, not the most common, the most stable words, the words which change least frequently. And found 8 cases where you have a correspondence between Basque and what goes on in the East. And, well, 2 of the words relate to the heavens. The word for star and the word for sun, or day. They are related. So this is simplified orthography. I just typed down what I could, because it turns out that the languages of the Caucasus are very complicated and difficult to pronounce. So I did it here in one case for the Chechen word for the morning twilight, which is related to words for day or sun in other languages, pronounced like something like and so I heard quite a lot of that in our meeting, and it reminded me again of my encyclopedia, in this case, Werner Bryan, in The Poor Mouth, where he talks about the German linguists who, by accident, got some tape of grunting pigs and mistook that for the real pronunciation of Irish. And of course, I forgot to mention that Werner Bryan also has a very nice description of hell in The Third Policeman. So, okay, so you have a word like Isar, very easy to pronounce in Basque, and then things like Tsaro or Zure, so in the North Caucasian languages, which potentially are related. In any case, Sarah thinks that that's the closest you get when you compare Basque with other language groups. You see less similarities. So at least it's a good starting point. So, okay, let's next picture of the Mediterranean, the island of Crete. Just because I was interested in that particular object here, the Pfeiffer's disk, a long time ago, and that's something you typically see on crackpot websites. It's a very nicely printed disk, the earliest printed object. It has exactly 61 words, and is deciphered in many languages. And now, of course, unless it's a known language, which can be demonstrated it isn't, it cannot be deciphered. However, 61 words in favorable circumstances is quite sufficient to get information about the grammar. And when I looked at that, almost 50 years ago, 45 years ago or so, then I was very surprised to see similarities both to Northwest Caucasian grammar and to Northeast Caucasian grammar. And at that time, it didn't seem to make much sense. But now, when one knows about the genetic part of it, and this movement from the Near East across the Mediterranean, it makes much more sense. And in fact, one of the discussions we had in Mainz was, are the Northwest Caucasian languages really related to the Northeast Caucasian languages? And the Russian linguists claim yes, and in Germany the opinion is no. And of course there were heated discussions which I cannot reproduce because it was about lots of words which are as difficult to pronounce as the one I tried before. But certainly, if you have a language which has similarities to both of them, at least from the grammatical sense, then you have a quite good chance that this relationship is quite deep and true. So, just an old reminiscence, and that here, again, about the Mediterranean, that's Spain. And now I'm coming back to the Celts. This is Basque language present day. Unfortunately, all these maps stop at national boundaries. So at that time, the language extended quite a bit into France. So you have Red Caesar was Gaia being divided into three parts. If you read Asterix and Obelix, they say it's 5. But, certainly this region was essentially Basque. And here you have another language, Iberian. And quite recently it was proven that the languages are closely related because the Iberians, who were good traders, they wrote the numerals on their checks phonetically, like we do. And so the numeral system turned out to be essentially the same as in Basque. And now when you look at that, this whole block is of non-Indo-European languages, presumably the language of the first farmers. And then here you have a big Celtic block. And when you go to the Lever Gabala, then you see there is a claim that the Celts, or at least the Gaels, last invasion of Ireland, they came from Spain. And there has been a lot of speculation if at least there is some memory of very old trade connections across the sea, which really seems to make quite good sense over here. So certainly it's more likely that they came maybe from France or so on. And so it would be of great interest to look at ancient genes to check if you really see these old connections. Now, one thing which might be of some help, there is one other language here, which is Indo-European, but presumably not Celtic, because these people ate pork, and they called it pork, and the P was not silent. Whereas in Celtic, the P vanished. So, when you look at Ptolemy's map, Ptolemy, the P is silent, of Ireland, then you have a few names with P around which you don't expect. So the Apetitani in Connaught, and just across to Scotland, then you have the Epidion Akron. Some people say that the P is secondary, and it's really the horse lovers, but I'm not so sure about that. So in any case, this whole question about genetic relations between Spain and Ireland became much more interesting now with facts about the movement of the first farmers and what happened with the second migration. So, okay, if you want to study that, then you should read Ptolemy, of course, but Ptolemy just has a few names, and there are 400 own stones around where you find many more names. Most of them, of course, in Ireland. So, but now you see the truth. Ireland was not Welsh, but Wales was part Irish. Because there are quite a number of own stones in Wales. And, the School of Celtic Studies plans to record them all. Now, if you want to have a really good image, you should do a laser scanning, like here, Dingle Peninsula. Do a laser scanning, like here, Dingle Peninsula, and but unfortunately we can't get the money for it, or only a part of it. So what to do? Yeah, poor institute. Well, that's actually Nora White who's working on that, but not even her salary is fully covered by that. So you can ask the people to take their cameras as good as possible and to make pictures, photographs of the stones from different angles. And then you can put those photographs together to a three-dimensional image, which is not quite as good as what you can do by laser recording, but it's sort of second best. And so again, that's a stone, Kilcolman, also on the Kingham Peninsula. And it looks quite nice. I mean, certainly the inscription is very readable, and it's perhaps not so good if you really want to find the handwriting of individual stonemasons. But certainly there has been a meeting, and so it's a very interesting activity. Now, time is running out, so I knew I wouldn't come to that, but just from the recent literature, there are interesting questions which might relate to present migrations and the push and pull. So, of course, I was thinking about the Mediterranean to have a nice swim in warm water. So when you read the Bible, you read about the Celts who moved into what at present is Turkish. There were no Turks around in Turkey. They came much later, the Galatians here. But also, people had to migrate because of climate problems or famine, and so like in the Great Famine. And I think one should have a closer look at these migrations in early periods. For example, something we don't know is how important were epidemics in times of migration. And the problem might come back to haunt us. One of the very recent papers, when you read Nature and Sciences, there's a claim that the first Indo-Europeans brought the plague to Europe, and the reason that so many of the locals were replaced in Middle Germany, 75% of the genes were replaced in a very short time. So probably 3/4 of the population was replaced. But then the archaeologists say if you go to Bulgaria, the newcomers from the Pontic Steppes, there were not so many, and they soon established peaceful trade relations with the locals. And from the start, it was profitable for both sides, and no trouble at all. So it can be very different. But then I mentioned the Sardinians, which for millennia had the same genes for 7,000 years now. But then there's apparently one time, 1200 BC, where they moved around the whole Mediterranean, plundering and doing whatever things because of climate problems. So certainly many things to study, but I just wanted to mention that one can think about them and should think about them. Well, maybe I'll leave that out, so it interests me a lot. Well, I can't leave it out quite because there's always the problem of natural catastrophes, where I could have made a better link to cosmic studies, geophysics, but we're talking about a certain very big volcanic explosion which blew up a whole island, the island of Santorini. And so now our latest appointment of senior professors is in school of cosmic physics and geophysics, and you see, well, he also goes to the Mediterranean. Of course, I don't quite know why you have to go to dangerous places like a volcano, which might blow up anytime again. Maybe not in Tenerife, but I think he goes to the Vesuvio too. Certainly these things have to be understood all together. The volcanoes, the observations of Venus, which I had no time to come to, the genes, and the archaeology, and the observations of the sun. And, well, DIAS is a good place to talk about these disparate things all together. And a lot of interesting discussions and publications have been made in the past 75 years. Of course, it would be much better if we had a single site where we could do all that, because that, well, Celtic studies, fortunately, is more or less, well, it's adjacent to theoretical physics, but cosmic physics is too far away. So we don't really have much of an occasion to talk in this way. So I hope that OPW would come this evening, but that's really something we would need. And of course, since I talked a lot about life scientists, I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea to have something like that, what we have in DIAS, also in the life sciences, and to have more institutes, high-quality institutes of our kind, like Germany has it with the Max Planck Institute. It would be much better not to remain alone every 20 years under threat of closure, because I hope I could convince you that even our fringe activities from time to time are quite interesting.
Thank you for that travel through the Mediterranean and a nice political ending point, But we have a limited amount of time left, and if there are any questions, Werner will take them. The Sardinians look to me to be a very interesting, monocultural type of, monogenetic type of activity. And how did they remain so isolated?
Part of it was that there was competition. The Greeks wanted to go there, the Etruscans wanted to go there, and they sort of kept each other out to a large extent. They also were pretty warlike, so it was not so easy to take over Sardinia. Corsica was much easier.
I think they're still pretty warlike.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always a good idea. And unfortunately, then they changed their language to Latin, so we don't. Before anything about their own language was recorded, but they kept their names, like it's done over here. And there are many old place names, and you can, for example, river names or so. The color of the water can be quite distinctive. So you can get out words like red and yellow. They look very much like words in Basque. So one can be quite sure that the languages were not so far, so distant.
I did quite a bit of work with in Prague, like with the Hrvatski Institute, but the Czechs were always claiming that they were Celts. But should I ring them up and tell them that they're not?
Well, it's too early. I mean, certainly there was the Boii. This was one of the really important Celtic tribes settled over there, and they were partially replaced by Germanic tribes. But then, in such cases, you never know to what extent linguistic change goes hand in hand with genetic change, and to what extent it remains separate. And one of the things we certainly got out from the discussions between the paleontologists, the paleogeneticists, and the archaeologists, that we really are just at the beginning of the research. We need much more data. The data we have now are interesting enough to convince the politicians that this research should be financed, and because the public is very interested, and there are nice exhibitions in museums and so on. So I'm sure that the data will come in, but I think what is necessary is an ongoing and regular discussion between the geneticists and the archaeologists and the linguists, and so we have installed a working group in Mainz, and we will meet twice a year to do that.
I think that's I was up first.
I'm wondering, what is the connection between Venus and eclipses and tree ring events?
Oh, okay. That's a page I didn't come to. I gave a talk at the Academy. In briefly, when you want to date what happened at these early times, in particular at the time when the Santorino volcano blew up, there is, fortunately, there were observations by Babylonian astronomers which in 1 year showed that Venus remained invisible for 5 months. And that may very well be due to obscuration of the sky the way we had it when the Iceland volcano blew up. And then it's a very interesting story, because then the island blew up, and the pea harvest was covered by ashes and pumice right at the time where some beetles were erupting. We're getting out of the piece. So you know that that happened in late spring, early summer. But then the astronomical observations indicate that there was an event in winter. And I'm discussing with Chris Bean, so that was the reason I showed his photograph, because he tells me that often these volcanic events come in 2 phases. So one might think when that happened, and then the precise dating of that depends on work of Mike Bailey with Irish bog oaks, where from the tree rings you see that in the year 1627, which fits with what you see on the cuneiform data, there was a big event, but the dating of the cuneiform data depends on an eclipse. And well, I could go on for another hour, but
there was one other hand here, yeah,
right.
And then we're going to have to call it, because we're being told to get out, I think. In the nicest possible way to do that, but
what's the definition of a Celt?
Part of the most important part of the definition, of course, must be someone who speaks a Celtic language. In fact, the usage, of course, is quite disparate because I mean, if you speak Irish, so if you pay less tax because at least in theory you speak Irish. But Nicole had a nice talk where we talked about cultural communalities like showing the heads of your beheaded enemies to people you entertain quite lavishly as your guests, and so it changes from century to century. But certainly, from the genetic data in Britain, it seems that there were very different group of hunter-gatherers who simultaneously, or more or less simultaneously, switched over to Celtic languages when people arrived from the continent, in the way that the local population in Hungary switched to Hungarian. So they certainly, genetically, they have very little, the Hungarians have very little in common to the people behind, on the other side of the Urals, which were the origin of their language. So, of course, one has to find a definition, but the reasonable definition, of course, would be about the language and what that means for the genes and for the culture, and as a secondary thought.
Okay, folks, we're going to have to call it there. There is a reception in the atrium upstairs to which everybody is invited, and we hope you'll come along. And thank you, Professor Nahm, who I should have said unifies all three schools actually of the college. Taken in the school of cosmos physics, theoretical physics, and Celtic studies. So that's why he was chosen to do this thing. This is work he does on the fringes of his core work. So you can imagine it would be a very different audience, I'm afraid, for his core work. But he's brought it down to the level that we can understand here tonight, I think, on his fringe work. So we thank you very much for this very interesting and erudite talk, and we show our appreciation to Professor Werner Nahm.